Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. It's about time we spoke about a bunch of books I've read lately because I haven't done a proper wrap-up video I think since the autumn time. I've decided to start doing my wrap-ups sort of like seasonally because I feel like I don't actually read enough to do a video every month about the books that I've read. I find it much easier to just pile them all up together and do them every sort of 3 months or so. The UK has seen sunshine I think every day for like the last 9 days. It's been absolutely glorious. And touch wood, the winter is fully behind us now. I'm gonna regret saying that. It's time to reflect on all the books that I read in the months of winter. So, a quick disclaimer, obviously December includes Christmas. I'm not gonna talk about Christmas books here. My brain is not in that headspace. If you're looking for Christmas recs in the middle of March, one, why? What are you doing? Secondly, this is not the place for it. So, anyway, we're gonna start off with a book that A, I'm not picking up because it's at the very bottom of a stack, and B, I don't even know what I can say about this book. Kingdom of Ash by Sarah J Maas. I finished that at the very beginning of December. What a wild ride. What an epic end to what is just an iconic genre-leading fantasy series. It's in a league of its own. We spend 7 books prior to Kingdom of Ash following our characters, hearing about their backstories, literally watching their hardships and being there throughout it all, and just seeing them all come together and kind of fighting for the same cause. Oh, it's beautiful, it's heartbreaking, it's epic. They're characters that I'm always going to be thinking about, and I think I can speak for most readers of this series when they say that. They're characters that just stick with you forever, that you spend a lot of time giving thoughts and time of day to, and that are almost inspiring and kind of help shape you as a person, as a reader. And that sounds so dramatic, but we can learn a lot from these characters and this story. Honestly, I genuinely believe that, and there is a reason why this series is so popular and has touched the lives of so many people, and I will always recommend it if you are looking for a fantasy series to get fully immersed in, to be obsessed about. Throne of Glass is the way to go. It will stand the test till the end of time, I'm sure of it. Then we're going to move on to a book that I read towards the end of December because I had a bit of a Christmas binge. I guess it's kind of Christmas, but it's not. So I'm going to include it because it's a book that I had personally never heard about before, and I just saw it at the library. It caught my eye, so I picked it up, and that is Midnight in Everwood by Maria Kuznia. I could be butchering that surname, but it's essentially a Nutcracker retelling. So it is wintry, it is associated with Christmas, but the book itself is not really revolving around Christmas. Now, my knowledge of the original Nutcracker story is extremely limited. I don't think I've ever really properly watched anything. I might have watched the Barbie Nutcracker maybe once. I was much more of a Princess and the Pauper kind of girl, I must admit. I didn't really know any of the lore or the original story, so I was quite surprised picking this up because it was pretty dark and twisted in places, and I don't know if that is the vibe of the Nutcracker. No idea, but that was my first impressions. I was quite shocked at how twisty it was. It was really easy to follow. It was written really beautifully. A lot of adjectives surrounding kind of like food and sweets, but it was really whimsical and enchanting, and it made it just perfect for that time of year, to be honest. I would definitely recommend reading it in the wintertime and around Christmas, but I love it when a retelling of such a historic, iconic story is easy to follow, because a lot of the times when I want to read a retelling of a story that maybe I'm not familiar with, it's probably because I don't want to go headfirst into the original because I just fear that it will go over my head. But the pacing was a bit of a letdown for this book, and I think that was the one thing that really changed my reading experience. It took some time to kind of get into the thick of the plot and the real climax. Essentially, it revolves around a girl, I can't remember her name, this was many months ago now, guys, but she aspires to be a ballerina. However, she's kind of subjected by her dad to quit that life. She needs to think about her prospects and her future in marriage, and all that shit women went through back in the day. And one of the suitors for her is a bit mysterious, definitely a lot more going on underneath the surface. Long story short, he transports her into Nutcracker realm, or Everwood, I assume, which is where the whole Nutcracker story takes place. The king, he kind of captures her and says, "You're mine now, you have to dance to entertain me," that kind of thing. So getting into that took a while, but once we were, it was a bit of a whirlwind, and it was really fast paced and gripping, but then it kind of slowed down a bit, and the majority of the middle of the book, I'd say, was really slow. There wasn't much going on. The one thing we did get was good interactions between characters. Our main character is trapped with a bunch of other girls who have also fallen victim to the king. It was lovely reading the dialogue, though they were really strong, inspiring women, and a lot of the conversations that they had were really formative, I think. But our main character was quite annoying, if I remember rightly. She did get on my nerves a little bit. You could definitely feel like the immaturity, and she was young, so it does make sense, and she's very determined, but she's also a bit stupid. But if you like found family for that reason, with the other girls that are in prison in this kingdom, then I would really recommend it, because I did think the found family was quite strong. We then move on to Legendary by Stephanie Garber. This is the second book in the Caraval trilogy, and we are following the second sister, Donatella, in this book. So in the first book, we're following Scarlet as she partakes in the games of Caraval, and in this book we are following her sister. However, upon finishing this, I do think I did prefer Caraval. It just wasn't as immersive as I thought it would be, and I can't explain that. I think it was giving middle book syndrome, in the sense of there was a lot of info dumping-ish. There was a lot of new concepts introduced, let's just say, that we didn't see in the first book. So in this book, I won't go into too much detail, but we're introduced to this concept of the Fates, and they're kind of like gods. They're high up mystical beings with specific powers. They're quite deadly, and they've kind of been like imprisoned and trapped for many years because of the danger that they pose to society, because they are so powerful and have the power to just obliterate whatever they want, basically. And I think we spent so long trying to build on that and focus on that it did take away from the story. And I think the whole charm of this trilogy ultimately is Caraval. And whilst this book did participate in another game within Caraval, didn't feel as action-packed. It felt like that plotline took a backseat while we were trying to focus so much on all this new information we were given. Having said that, it was still really atmospheric, and it did have that Caraval charm about it that we get in the first book. Stephanie Garber writes her writing is so enchanting and charming, but things were getting confusing at times, and when the action was absent, it made it a bit boring when reading it. There was also quite a few new characters introduced, or at least we were spending a lot of time with characters that we'd only seen glimpses of in the first book, which was good and bad. Again, it was just kind of adding to that confusion of trying to learn about so many new people and things. However, Dante, for example, we get a lot more spotlight of in this book, and I thoroughly enjoyed seeing more of him. He is a great character. But yeah, it was kind of a book of two halves, to be honest, and I walked away from it feeling a little bit disappointed. Not massively, but a little bit. And I've just realised I haven't been given my ratings for books. I'll make sure I edit them in, but I'll say now, this I gave a 3.5 stars. So not bad, but I don't know, I was expecting more from it. Then we have The Boyfriend by Frida McFadden, which was my first thriller book in ages, and I read this as part of the Goodreads Choice Awards nomination, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I ate this book up very quickly. I was so far off with my theory, as I feel like I always am whenever I read a thriller book. But I mean, it keeps you on your toes, I suppose, and this book definitely did. The twist that everyone talks about at the end of this book, fair play. There was no way in hell I saw that coming, but I thought that it was actually really clever. It was so fast paced, and I feel like in theory the plot line sounds kind of simple and like definitely something that we would have seen before. Our main character, again, I cannot tell you her name, basically finds the perfect boyfriend. She's been so unlucky in dating and love in the past, and she's kind of fed up of the dating scene, to be honest. She always just seems to get matched with absolute creeps or just scrubs, if you will. And she finally finds what appears to be the perfect guy, but alongside that there's a lot of murders going on, and the suspect is always the person's boyfriend, and she's just suddenly feeling a little bit suspicious of this guy that she doesn't know very well, who's coming across just to be too good to be true. It's a dual timeline book, which I really enjoyed, getting the two different insights. So following the present day with our main character and in the past with the boyfriend. So naturally you're trying to kind of like make links in between the characters and how everything obviously ties in together in the present day. And it did tie in, and it was really cleverly done, I think, and it all made sense. There wasn't really any plot holes that I could see, and I love the way that Frida McFadden writes. It's in like the first person, and it just feels like you know the character personally. Like the way I describe it is, it almost feels like they're talking to you as if you're like on a FaceTime call or something. It's quite witty, there's a lot of banter, it just feels very familiar and like intimate almost, which I love that because it's just instant connection to the characters then, and I feel like I can really genuinely picture and hear them as if they're a real person talking in real life about real events. So yeah, I haven't read many of Frida McFadden's books, and I definitely need to because I have enjoyed the ones I've read so far. I gave this one a 4 stars. It was amazing. We then moved on to Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. This was a book club pick for the month of January, and I did want to read this prior. I don't think I would have got to it if it wasn't a book club. I gave this a 3 star, and I'm still not sure really how I properly feel about this book. I think ultimately I appreciate this book and what it's trying to do, and I appreciate there are going to be people, and there are people that loved this book and got so much out of it and could relate. For me, I think it's definitely apparent that Sally Rooney is not my kind of author in the way that she writes. I find her format so hard to grasp, and I'm sure you've probably heard that from all kinds of different creators and readers. It is true, it's hard to grasp when you're not used to, you know, the absence of quotation marks and really big chunky paragraphs, unbroken paragraphs. The dialogue definitely carried this book for me. It really focuses on relationships. We're following 2 brothers, Peter and Ivan, and their father has just passed away, and we're just following them in their lives, how they're dealing with it, their struggles, the relationships that they have in their lives with other women, just how everything kind of comes together and shapes them as people, I suppose. Peter, I didn't really like, and I don't know if that was the intent of the book, or, you know, to see how grief affects everyone so differently. You know, it's easy to sit there and say, I didn't like Peter, I thought he was selfish and hypocritical, but then knowing everything that he is going through, his animosity with his brother Ivan, they don't really get on very well. The death of his dad, the relationships that he have in his life are very complicated. Is justified the right word? I don't know, but it's really highlighting how events in people's lives will alter them differently and will make them behave in different ways. So I guess it was interesting and insightful in that way to study these characters, because ultimately this is a character study kind of book. I feel like there's not much plot. We are literally getting a deep dive into, like I say, their relationships and the way they're navigating their life. For me, we dove in too deeply. The monologues in this book as well from these characters were quite exhausting at times, so in my opinion boring. It made reading it feel like a chore as opposed to something that I enjoy, and I was really having to drag myself through at times. The writing just felt clunky to me, but I'm glad that I've read it because I wanted to read it. I don't think I would have got to it otherwise, and it's quite an accomplishment because this ain't a small book either. So next up is Apprentice to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Mehra, and this was a huge letdown for me. I hate to say it. I gave this 2.5 stars. Assistant to the Villain was so much fun. The plot was always moving. The slow burn romance was really giving, and you know, I was having to work for it, but I loved that because we were given so many crumbs along the way. However, this one I feel like was almost trying to achieve the same thing as the first book, which is just an impossibility. Like, this has to progress somehow, right? And I just feel like it didn't. In regards to the romance, at least anyway, it was still trying to slow burn, but I feel like we'd already reached somewhat of a conclusion in the first book. So I'm like, what's stopping the characters now in this book from being together? And it's one of those things where, like, every time something was about to happen, something would interrupt it, and you know, when you're just like, really? It was getting so boring and so redundant at this point and frustrating, because whilst I wouldn't say this is necessarily a romantasy, but then I feel like the main plot line, at least that's hinted on the back, is usually the romance. So yeah, that was really disappointing. And then the other side to that is the plot, and the plot was so chaotic and all over the place. I couldn't immerse myself in this because every chapter there was a shift in plot, and it was getting so confusing and like too outlandish that I had no idea really what was going on. So all in all, both elements of this book fell flat for me, which was such a shame. Then we move on to the first 5-star read of the year, and that was Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. I didn't rate any of the other books at 5 stars. I think Fourth Wing was a 4, maybe a 4.5. Iron Flame was about a 3.5, and this was a definite 5-star. I just think Rebecca Yarros is such a genius in the way that she writes this story. It's so compelling. I loved everything about it. I loved the characters. And, you know, Violet and Xaden are such an established couple at this point. This is the 3rd book in the series. Yeah, I'm still enjoying reading about them, seeing their interactions and their relationship together, but then also the way that she brings side characters and characters that have had a bit of a backseat in the other books forwards and gives them a bit of a time to shine. And I loved that. Riddoch was giving in this book. We loved him. To the dragons, do I need to explain? Everyone loves the dragons in this book. They're iconic. They bring so much to this story. It's the 3rd book. We're thoroughly invested. Obviously, I can't really tell you anything about this for spoilers, but the plot was constant. There were twists, there were turns. It was keeping me entertained. My heartstrings were constantly pulled on with the things that these characters go through. And the ending is on my brain 24/7. I absolutely need the next book now, and the fact that we've got to wait like 2 years for the next one feels criminal to me. If you want to know, you've got to get to know. It was incredible. The next one is quite frankly too high up for me to bother reaching, but that is Magnolia Park's The Long Way Home by Jessa Hastings, and that was a 4.5-star read for me. So close to a 5, but there was just a slight dip in the middle where the plot felt a tiny bit repetitive, but I'm still obsessed with the story and these characters as well. I think about Magnolia and BJ all the time. Their love story is so frustrating, like so frustrating, but I can't stop reading about it and thinking about it and caring about it. That book started off with a bang as well. Like, if you know, you know, but the topics that are touched on within the first 100 pages, ouch. And I wasn't expecting that. Following on from the first Magnolia Parks book, I didn't know where this book was going to go. It ended so catastrophically, the first book, so I didn't know how things were going to get resolved, where the characters were going to be. It was frustrating but beautiful and addicting. Again, strong start and a very strong finish. I immediately want to jump into the next Magnolia Parks book. Have to read The Great Undoing Daisy hates first. Still obsessed with this book and these characters. They feel so real to me. They physically hurt my heart. I really recommend this series if you like found family, if you like toxicity, because let's be honest, it's addicting to read about. If you like reading about rich, lavish lifestyles, if you like even mafia, I personally just think it's fantastic. And then the next 5-star read of the year, Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. I loved this, possibly even more than I thought. I thought I was going to enjoy it, but I was obsessed with this when I was reading it. Guys, I just edited out a massive chunk of me explaining this book and realising that I don't actually think you're supposed to know that. So let me try again. There's 2 characters, Iris and Rowan. They work for a paper. They're kind of like journalistic rivals, and there's also a war going on between gods. Iris's brother is fighting in the war, and to kind of help Iris cope with all the things that are going on in her life right now, she's writing letters. She notices that when she slips them underneath her wardrobe door, they start to vanish. But she doesn't realise that instead of vanishing, they're actually being delivered to Rowan, her rival at work. And he is writing back and so on and forth. And, you know, that's the real basic parts of this plot. There is so much more going on. It was beautiful. It was charming, captivating, emotional. Oh, just all of those words. For a book that's kind of short, like it's not the biggest of books, it felt so much bigger. Like in a good way, not in a way where it felt like it was like a long slog or something. And I just think that's so clever from Rebecca Ross to be able to write characters and a storyline that felt so fleshed out in such a short amount of pages. My heart was built up and broken within those 300 odd pages, and I think that's an incredible feat to achieve when you're writing a story that's a lot shorter than other books that are like double the amount of pages and still don't give me that emotional connection. Obsessed with Rowan. He loves Iris so hard. He is such a caretaker, and he would crawl for her. He's funny, he's teasing, but he's also sensitive. He is devoted to Iris. He just wants what's best for her. He's a proper gentleman. If you're looking for a fantasy book that isn't too intense, like this is fantasy, but I feel like the world does feel pretty normal, other than the gods, obviously, but the whole paper setting and the war that's going on, it just felt very similar to wars that we've obviously had in our world. So, and I read Death in the Arctic by Tom Hindle. This is a mystery. It was okay. I gave this 3 stars. It was okay. It's a book that just I've never really given any thought to since reading it, and whilst I was reading it, unless I was physically reading it, again, once it was closed, I didn't really think about it. It was definitely interesting and did keep me entertained. It follows a murder mystery on a luxury sort of aircraft that is flying over the Arctic. A bunch of people are invited to, it's basically like a press launch. So the actual flights on this aircraft aren't available to the public yet, but a bunch of people that the CEO knows and like influencers are all invited to take part in like this press launch event. But on this aircraft during this, somebody appears to have been murdered. For the most part, we're following the POV of an influencer, but we do get little insights into other characters and their thoughts and opinions on the aircraft and what's going on, which was really interesting. There was a real diverse bunch of people with lots of clashing personalities and different thoughts and morals, which definitely made it an interesting mystery, trying to figure out who do we think has committed the murder, what are people's motives, that kind of thing. It was definitely an innovative concept, having this really bougie luxury aircraft as the setting, and obviously most of this book takes place on that aircraft. They are airborne, so that is where they are. That's where they kind of have to stay. They are trapped in that environment. So I did like that, but overall it was nothing mind-blowing, and I would say the reveal at the end, once the mystery was kind of solved, felt a bit shit. Personally, I don't think it was anything mind-blowing or mind-bending. It was just a bit like, oh, I don't know. I wouldn't say it was obvious, but then it also, yeah, I don't know. It just didn't feel that exciting, but other than that, it was an entertaining read. So then we read Twisted Games by Anna Huang. I'd read Twisted Love last year and really didn't care for it. I gave it like a 2-star, but I had heard that Twisted Games was like a fan favorite, and I'd already seen a couple of scenes hinted at on social media, and I just thought, oh, I am intrigued. Like, I wanted to read it. It's a princess bodyguard romance, which immediately is kind of intriguing, and it was the perfect palate cleanser actually, and I gave it 3.5 stars. With a lot of romances, especially spicier ones, I do feel like it was quite formulaic, but I was kind of expecting that, and it was a satisfying read, so I didn't really mind. And I really actually liked and appreciated Bridget as the main character. She's a princess, she's a lot of responsibilities, and she just really wants to live life as freely as possible before she has to take on more of these responsibilities kind of in the future as the monarchy changes with time. I loved that. I don't know, I loved seeing that insight and watching her try her best to be carefree. She was under a lot of pressure and a lot of stress with her life, and she's just trying to live as much as she can like a normal girl. I do understand the Reese Larson hype. I personally, after reading this, don't think I am a Reese girl through and through, but I get it. Okay, I can understand why people would like Reese. I did find him a bit one-dimensional as a character, but then on reflection of that, I feel like it probably makes a lot of sense. As a bodyguard and an ex-military soldier, he has probably been brought up and trained and instilled to be very monotone, very flat, not really give away much of how he's feeling, any of his thoughts. So sometimes he comes across as very flat and stony, but he probably would be, do you know what I mean? Some of the plot was fun, some of it fell a bit flat, but generally it was a fun time, and would recommend if you're looking for a bit of a spicier romance palette cleanser in between whatever else you're reading. Then in time for Valentine's Day, I read The Do-Over by Lynn Painter, my first Lynn Painter book, and I loved this. This was so much fun, a 4-star read. I loved it more than I thought. It's a YA romance, so there's no spice, and it takes place with 2 teenagers who are still at school. It's really giving like American teen rom-com, especially the first couple of chapters. I just felt like I could really hear our main character, Emily, talking over like a montage or something. I don't know, it gave really good vibes. And the concept is obviously so fun and unique of this book. It's like a Groundhog Day, Valentine's Day situation. Emily keeps waking up every morning on the same Valentine's Day, and the day is repeating itself, and she's trying to figure out how to stop this loop. Initially, because of that, I did think, sounds fun, but could it get boring and stupidly repetitive? Obviously, it has a repetitive nature to it because the day's repeating itself, but it's done in a way where it doesn't feel boring, and the plot does still take turns, and I think it was done really well, and it kept me so entertained. And seeing the relationship blossom between Emily and Nick was just so heartwarming. Nick, as the main male character, was just very dreamy, arrogant, but like in the best way, and very just cool, calm and collected, but you could also tell that he really cared about Emily, and a lot of admiration towards her that was quite deep set, I think. And it was also just the perfect length and the perfect pacing. I think it's a very short and sweet YA romance, and I think that was perfect. Any longer and it probably would have started to feel a bit repetitive and dragged out, so it was just perfectly done, I think. Then I decided to finish off the Caraval trilogy with Finale. And you know that meme of the horse that's drawn really well at the beginning and really shittily at the end, and people often use it to compare like TV shows that start really well and end really shit? I feel like that's the Caraval series. I feel like the first book was the best and the last book was the worst. To be honest, I really don't think we needed this book. As I mentioned earlier, Caraval follows Scarlet, Legendary follows Donatella, and I feel like we could have just ended it there. Caraval from two different perspectives of the sisters. This just felt unnecessary. I feel like what happened in this book could have happened in the second book and stopped a lot of the plot being dragged out and kept it action-packed. Pacing was wrong and the plot felt a bit all over the place, to the point where like we were given almost so many like plot twists and like bombs dropping. It was getting a bit ridiculous, and it lost its like oomph, because I was like, oh, another ridiculous thing's just happened. And I don't know, I guess it felt like a desperate way to try and keep the plot exciting and relevant when really we just didn't need this plot at all. It felt like I'm writing this book because I have to, because I'm writing a trilogy, and I need to write a third book, and I just don't think we needed it. I think a lot of this could have been wrapped up in the second book, and it could have been kept as like a nice little duet. I do think the Fates were a fun idea. As I mentioned, these powerful beings, a really fun concept and idea of all these different personalities and abilities that they have and the havoc that they can wreak on the world, but I just don't think it was done as well as it could have been. Ending was really disappointing. I just had no real excitement or anticipation when I was reading this book, and that's really sad, because it's literally called Finale. It is the end of this big epic game and these iconic characters, that I just felt so indifferent about it. And the last book I want to talk about is Something Wilder by Christina Lauren, another book club book for the month of February. And this book was so weird. It was so random. I gave it a 2.5 star. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe I didn't research into it enough beforehand, but it just was not at all what I was expecting from a romance book. We're following our main characters Lily and Leo, who used to be in a relationship and broke up for whatever reasons, and they are thrown back together. Forced proximity situation where Lily works at this like kind of adventure, treasure hunting, like excursion kind of group, if you will, and Leo is a customer who's going to go on this adventure, not realizing that Lily is kind of leading the excursion. So they're thrown back together again. So we've got a mixture of their romance with this big kind of adventure plot. I would say the adventure plot definitely outweighs the romance. I wouldn't even really class this book as a romance book. It was crumbs that we were getting. I'd say there was probably only 2 chapters out of the whole book that felt dedicated and focusing on Lily and Leo's kind of rekindling of their relationship and, you know, having actual in-depth chats with each other. So it didn't feel very romantic, but there was a lot of focus on the adventure plot, and it got quite dark at times. I'm talking death, I'm talking guns, really hard times. Some of those elements were just so ridiculous and outlandish, it was almost laughable. And the way the characters were dealing with it was just, for me, so unrealistic. I guess maybe if you want something lighthearted that you can kind of laugh at and not take seriously, then this might be great for you, but that wasn't the expectation I had going into it, which is probably why I didn't enjoy it as much as some other people have. So I also thought the plot was a bit random. When we were focusing on the adventure treasury side of it, I thought it could still be like a fun time, but we were focusing more on like boring things like setting up camps, traveling from one place to another, rather than the actual activities that they're meant to be participating in when they get to said locations. Felt like a really weird thing to focus on. Like, the amount of chapters I swear to God I read where they were just riding on horseback from A to B, and I was like, what? This is so boring. So ultimately I just wish we got given more romance, because I think that would have been a lot nicer to focus on. And Leo, the male main character, I think had so much potential. He seemed like a real gentleman, a really nice guy, really respectful, and I would have liked to have seen more of him. And also, without giving the plot away, there's a lot of other characters within this excursion, but we don't get to see as much of them, especially within the second half of the book, which was a bit of a shame, because I think some of them were really contributing well to the plot and these different character dynamics, and then they were kind of just taken away from us, which was a bit of a shame. And that is the end of all the books that I read in the wintertime. You can tell from this that I was definitely in my fantasy era. I still kind of am, and A lot of the romances that I read were only because it was kind of like Valentine's Day. I've just been in such a fantasy mood lately, and there's so many series that I've been wanting to get into. And I think when the weather's been a bit gloomier and moody as well, it just makes me want to pick up like a dark fantasy book. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, comment and subscribe if you did, and I will catch you next week with a brand new one. Bye friends.